thank you for coming tonight. We are so thankful to have our guests here and our moderator, Vanya. And I'm just going to run through just a couple of things about CHC. And let me see if we have it up here. How many people know about CHC? Okay, I'm going to quickly do this. So we are a community-based nonprofit. We've been here for just over 65 years, and which is a long time to be here. And we're very appreciative of the support from the community. We are working. We want our kids to be thriving in their learning environment, in their social environment, and at home. And so these are some of the elements that we really focus on to help them be their best and bring their best. Our vision is to remove barriers, and we believe in the promise and potential of every child, every individual child. We offer a range of treatment, evaluation, treatment, and support services here. These are the variables that make up, the important variables that make up what we feel are resilient, happy, and empowered children and young girls. Hopefully be thriving adults as well. And these are 4 areas of excellence: ADHD, learning differences, anxiety, depression, and autism. CHC, our cornerstone is really around these overlapping areas, because we realize that every individual and their journey and their path can be very complex. And what we're finding more and more is there is not one situation or child that fits in any single box. And so we really, one of our specialties is being able to put together a multidisciplinary team to really look at the whole child. And so that's what we do best. And here are our 4 divisions. We are crammed into this building. We have many different areas. So our clinical services focus on evaluation and treatment, and support services. Our community connections department offers these classes. We also have the EdRev Expo that's coming on May 4th. It's a huge conference that is a resource for parents at AT&T Park on May 4th this year. We also work with schools, and we work with counselors, and we also have a teen wellness committee that just published a book. And then Sandhill School, it's an independent day school that focuses on language-based learning differences. And it's grades for 1st through 8th grade. We also have the Esther B. Clark School, which is a therapeutic day school. It's a non-public day school. And the grades are 2nd grade through 10th grade. And kids who have more therapeutic needs, behavioral therapeutic needs, are referred to that school. And they're usually referred by their schools, the school districts. Okay, coming up, our next one, related, navigating health services for your child is coming up on March 7th. This date is new, which is why we put this up here. It should be helpful for any parent who's struggling to find support. We know that the mental health system right now is not where we ideally want it to be, and we recognize that this group is a high-risk group, and so we invite you to come to that on March 7th. It's a Thursday. Okay. I'm going to ask Ian. Well, maybe we should do video first. Okay, all right. Yeah.
So this is my son, Grayson.
This looks like a mug shot, but I think it gets better.
He is 25. He started his transition about 5 years ago now. And he wanted to be here tonight, but his dad gave him another offer. He just passed his national boards permit to become a medical assistant, and so he's in Kenya with his dad as a physician, and they've been working for 2 days together. So he says hello, and he's glad you're all here, and I'll let him speak, because he's more interesting than I.
Jumbo from Africa. My name is Grayson Melantine. I'm Anne's son. She's representing both of us at this panel today. I'm so sorry that I can't make it. I just want to thank you all for coming. It takes courage to gather information for either yourself, a friend, or a loved one. I believe the people on this panel are the best way to get informed and start living your true selves. I know when I first started transitioning, I was scared, and the love and support of my family and friends and also the internet helped me a lot. So have fun today. I'm sorry I'm not there. And bye.
We're a safe space. And welcome Vanya, who is here to moderate, and she'll introduce everyone. Yeah.
So I just want to introduce myself. My name is Vanya Matthews, and I have a business, B. Matthews Therapeutic and Educational Consulting, and I work with families that are not sure, what to do next for their child. It is a mental health service, and I'm a therapeutic and educational placement specialist. So my point of entry, I was asked by Cindy, I believe, to become being an expert on this panel on the trans experience. And I said, Cindy, I would love to do that, but I am by no means an expert at all. I am just having clients now that I am learning about their experience. I literally was visiting a 12-year-old out at a program and said, could you please walk me through your experience? What do you want to be called? Et cetera, et cetera. So I'm very, very new to this. So I am totally excited to be here and facilitate this process of getting a greater understanding of what the trans experience is from this wonderful panel, and also helping you get your questions answered as well. I know we've got parents in here of young people who are perhaps transitioning, teenagers, and people who are interested, or mental health practitioners. So this should be a very exciting conversation tonight. Thank you for being here. The format that we're going to use is we're going to, for about 45 minutes, we have some curated questions. So we'll be asking these to the panelists. During this time, I know a lot of thoughts and questions are going to come up for you in the audience. Please write those down, because we are going to have an audience Q&A, and that will be about 30 minutes following. And the other cool surprise we have as well is that afterwards the panelists will actually be staying to be receptive to questions if you want to ask them something personally or just share your experience. So that's what we'll be doing in terms of format. Thank you so much for being here tonight. The next thing we're going to do is have the panelists introduce themselves and their point of connection with the trans experience, and then I'll get into questions. Let's start with you, Gilbert.
Hi everyone, my name is Gilbert Gamad. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the youth program coordinator at the San Mateo County Pride Center up in downtown San Mateo. I also work with Outlet of Adolescent Counseling Services. Other things that are related. I also identify as non-binary, and I think I already said this, but my pronouns are they, them, theirs. If you're not familiar with what that sounds like, it sounds like, do you know, Gilbert, they are really nervous right now for some reason, so they're going to be Thank you, Gilbert.
And I'm Kathy Newman-Whipfler, and I'm the lucky parent of a trans son and a cis daughter. And I'm here to share with you that it's a wonderful learning experience. Don't be scared, it's great. And so that's who I am, and here's my wonderful partner. Thanks, Kathy.
Rich Whipfler, I can't add to that. We're here as a couple, having watched this. We're probably the oldest, maybe chronologically, as well as having
You have the oldest.
history with it.
I was going to say you have the oldest child, at least.
Yes. 31.
My name is Laura Doctor, and my son Eli is a transgender and man, and he is about to be 21 years old, and he came out as he moved into high school, and he attended Castellea School, where I'm a teacher.
Thank you, Laura. Hi, I'm Ann Melantine, and I am the mother of Grayson Melantine, my son, and he started transitioning about 5 years ago and is doing really well. It's an incredible experience, like you said, to see a child blossom.
And I'm Brad Ward, use pronouns she, her, hers, transgender woman. I'm a college counselor at Menlo Atherton High School, and I was in my mid-30s when I finally decided it's time to start doing something about this, and there weren't even words and vocabulary back when I started coming out.
Thank you, Brad. And that's a perfect segue, because the next thing that we are going to be talking about is the language around this. There's so much to know, and there's so much that's changing, that's morphing, and the language is really important because it affirms experiences or it denies experiences. And so I've asked the panel to talk about what feels important to them that we need to know in educating ourselves on how to use language in the trans experience. We're going to start with Gilbert.
I like the mic because it helps me feel like I have a talking stick, so I know when to stop talking. So I guess what comes up for me, specifically with regard to language, are two specific things. The first thing is something that I feel like often shows up in media that people don't seem to understand, is that transgender itself is not a verb. It's not a noun, it's an adjective, right? Transgender is an explanation of a form of experience of a particular gender identity, right? When someone says that they're a trans woman, it's not that they're a transgendered woman, right? It's that they are a transgender woman, so a woman by trans experience. Does that make sense to everybody in the room? I say that just because oftentimes in these sorts of settings, I've come across people who refer to the community as people who are transgendered or cisgendered, and not really them understanding that like it's not a conversion therapy kind of like process, because the editing or the kind of editing of it into kind of a verb kind of has this weird undertone that we're turning people, like turning everybody into transgender, when really it's someone really coming into themselves more and really understanding who they are and who that person might have been all along, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Yeah.
Brad, over to you on that one. What feels important that people should know and take away from the language around this?
I would say that it's been just a continually evolving process. I mean, when I started coming out, 15 years ago, I didn't even come across the word transgender until I read a book about it. And I read this book, I thought, oh my gosh, that is me, that's my story. I had no idea there was anyone like this. I've been working at colleges and high schools for almost 20 years, and I feel like every month there's something new coming out, and the students are coming to me like, didn't you know about this? I'm like, no, I've never heard that, tell me more. And it's just a continually evolving thing with pronouns, with how you refer to people. When I was coming out, there was like cross-dresser was a big term, and no one uses cross-dresser anymore. Or transsexual, or I think I was writing down like a sex change was like the surgery you had back then, and then very quickly it was sex reassignment surgery, and that went away. Now it's gender confirmation surgery. And if I can't keep up with it, you probably can't keep up with it, and that's okay. And it's okay to make mistakes. So just be flexible and be kind of continually aware of change.
Thank you for that, Brad. And yes, I made a huge mistake on my email, which actually brought this up. And I said, wow, this must be important because, I called it something way to the left or way to the right. Any other panelists, in regards to your children going through this experience with pronouns, or, just kind of your thoughts on that and personal experience, what would you like to add?
Ask your child. They'll tell you how they want to be referred to and honor their wish. It's pretty simple, and you're going to slip up sometimes. But ours likes to be called he, and he's now he, and that's how I refer to him all the time. And every now and then when I go into history, I'll slip back into looking at a picture, and I'll say, oh, that was she. And that's okay. Even with him, it's like there was a change. And we went from she to he. But English is just torturous. It creates more problems than it's worth.
Thank you, Kathy.
Maybe a question for the other panelists. Speaking of pronouns that we use, which I'm more selfish about this, but tell me if it's also your experience that it's so hard after all the years our child came out late. So we were used to her being her for, it took 2 or 3 years. We kept slipping back into her when we met him.
Yeah.
Among ourselves. Am I right?
I would confirm that. I just want to say for my son, it was important to be properly gendered, and it took me 3 or 4 years and he finally made me put a quarter in the jar every time I misgendered him. So he had a lot of extra money for movies, but I'm getting better, and I wanted to say that I don't know if anyone else has had the same experience. It gets worse for me when the whole family's home, and I slip, and it's easier for me to slip, so I have to be extra careful. But I have to say, when I do it correctly, he just gives me this look of wonder, which it's probably a low bar, but that's
Thanks, Anne. Laura.
Yeah, I have two things that are sort of related to this. I also have a child who is assigned female at birth and now looks more masculine. I say this to show that it's not always a complete transition. So the word trans, and sometimes it's put with a little star after it, to encompass the wide experience that people have. And one of the things that I wanted to do in the beginning was to know, like, well, what do trans people want? And I realized really quickly that trans people are just as diverse as the rest of us, and that cis people, and I realized also, I apologize, that we just said we were going to use pronouns, and all the cis people on the panel forgot. And so it's actually really indicative of our privilege and how we have to actually realize that if we're going to ask for pronouns, we can't just ask people who might be, we think, oh, you might be trans, so you should
Laura,
say your
can
pronouns.
you say more what cis is? I'd like to
Oh,
be
I'm sorry.
educated on that.
So CIS, cis, basically means that you identify as the gender that matches the gender that you were assigned at birth. So when I was born, my parents said, oh, yay, a girl. Actually, I'm not sure they said that, but, and always I felt like a girl. And I still identify as a woman, and, you know, I'm what would be called a little bit of a tomboy maybe, but sort of femme. And so that's what we mean by cis. It's like the opposite. It's actually a term that's used in chemistry as well.
So how would I use this in the English language? Like, give me, kind of like what Gilbert did, give me a sentence where I might, how do I use that?
Oh, my son did it really well. He's living with 2 other men next year. He said one is skinny and gay, one is cis and buff, and one is trans and soft.
Thank you for that, Laura. And we're going to segue into talking about what the trans experience of really coming out was for everyone here, whether you're a parent or a person that did have that process. Talk to me a bit about what really feels important to share about what that process is like coming out. Can I start with you, Brad?
Yeah, well, so I'm turning 51 pretty soon, and so for me to come into this whole world, you know, being a teen right now, it's like that's a part of your life. When I was growing up, you know, like when I was in high school and middle school in the late 70s, mid 80s, there was no terminology around this at all. And I'm going to a Catholic school and thinking, why do I want to hang out with the girls all the time and avoid the boys all the time? That continued through college, into early adulthood, not until my mid-30s when I read this book by a professor who was at Colby College at the time, Jennifer Boylan, who wrote about her experience as a transgender person. And it was referred to me by a friend because I was out late one night with her describing my whole life story, and she says, you need to read this book. This might sound a lot like what you're going through. And I read the book, and that was like my life right there almost. And I thought, wow, finally there's terminology for it. I'm in my mid-30s at that point, way down the road. And even then I was kind of scared, like, now what? Because the author of the book had surgery, and I thought, is that in my future? That, you know, there were a lot of questions, and then what would my parents think, and my, you know, rest of my family and friends. Very long story short, because we don't have all day here. When I was coming out to everyone, you know, it was first family, close friends, even my most conservative evangelical preacher. I have a lot of family in the South and so forth, and a lot of friends in the college counseling world who work for very conservative colleges. Every single one of them was like, great, cool, fine. I'll still go camping with you. I still love you. I want to hear more about that. There was not one bit of rejection. And, you know, to this day, like, you know, friends and family, it's been amazing. Work was a different experience, unfortunately, but the family and friends were incredible. So yeah, it's just good to be who you are.
Thank you, Brad.
I guess we'll get into the mental health piece in
Yes.
another question. So I want to stay very optimistic about this. I would say that Gray's transition was bumpy from a mental health perspective, and he kind of crashed and burned before he got to where he is now. But I would like to validate what you said. My 80-year-old parents, when I talked to my mom, and I was terrified, conservative Catholic, narrow-minded upbringing. Well, I loved Gray 5 minutes ago, and I love him now, and that was a real hurdle for Gray and for all of us. And so, I would say friends have been inquisitive and want to learn and become educated, as did my family and my now former husband's family. So very, very supportive across the board. No cyberbullying, no discrimination in employment yet, and if anything, I would say he says that people have looked at him, but it was more an inquisitive look, not a hostile look. So I would say, for the most part, very positive.
And Anne, quick question.
Yes.
As a mom, what was your first maybe word of reaction to how you felt? Just, wow, okay, child's coming out. How is this for me?
It's a little different for me because Gray and I have had a long road together. He has pretty complex language-based learning disabilities, and he's had so much therapy and special schooling over the years that it sort of felt like one more pebble in the path a little bit. It didn't feel as earth-shattering as it might for someone else who was pretty much a round peg in a round hole, which Gray was not. It was also a confirmation of some feelings that I'd had about him. When he came out as gay, he wasn't as relieved and open-hearted and just celebratory about it as I thought he might feel, and I thought maybe perhaps there's something else there. And I had read Andrew Solomon's book, Far from the Tree, which some of you may have read, which is a transformational book, probably one of the most important books I've ever read. And I had read the transgender piece, and I thought that perhaps we had that coming. So not a surprise, but there was also a kernel of hope that, maybe after all these years, we've come up with something that could ameliorate some of the depression, anxiety, and we can get into that later.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And Laura, for
So,
you and your child, how would you describe the experience of coming out?
I guess I'll stick with me because it's really, is this working enough?
Yes.
It's really hard to speak for them. But my child was actually a thriving middle school girl. I'm a little biased, but an incredibly beautiful, long blonde hair, curvy early, straight A's, athlete of the year. Things seem to be really great. And my first response, honestly, was, who's going to love my kid? And I actually didn't know enough transgender people to know that a lot of people will love your kid. There's actually cis people, there's gay people, there's straight people, there's a lot of people who will love your kid. And I just didn't know that, and that was really scary to me. And then the other thing that was interesting for me was I had the challenge and gift of when I was like, well, how do you know that you're trans? And he said, well, Mom, how do you know you're a woman? And I was like, well, I just know. And he said, well, your friend had breast cancer and she was reluctant to remove her breasts. And you said, oh, I would just chop mine off. So it doesn't have to do with your breasts. And I was like, you're right. I would still be a woman if I didn't have breasts. And he said, so what does it have to do with, Mom? He's like, is it in your reproductive system? And I said, well, I don't know. It might be tied to the fact that I can have babies. But I said, actually, I think it's more up here, maybe here. And he said, that's how it is for me too, Mom.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Rich and Kathy, tell us a bit about the coming out process with your young person and your experience.
It was a longer process. The coming out started when he was, or she at the time was 16 or so, junior in high school, and identified more or less as a lesbian. And, actually, freshman year, I think he joined the Gay-Straight Alliance. So that was the school happened to be very supportive of this, so he didn't feel threatened, I don't think, at the time. And he identified as I guess I'd call it butch lesbian going forward through college. And then there was a second phase when he was 24, 25, and then the transition came in, and there were much more deeper discussions. But by that time, he was pretty much on his own. We let him lead the way, if I might speak that way. Do you want to add to that, Kathy?
That's all factually very correct. And we went back to some old family videos recently to watch some just fun that was going on with the family when my younger daughter was 2.5 and the trans son was about 6. And we made a comment about, oh, you are the best older sister that our daughter could have. And in listening to the video, he spoke up in the background and he said, brother. So the transition starts very, very early. They know. And our son always identified with boys and went through the steps to get there, but is just so happy now and happily married. And I would put a plug in that the partners that your son or daughter chooses are also going to be wonderful people that understand that the kernel of the person doesn't change as they go through the transition. And that's what's been just a wonderful joy and a surprise is nothing really changed with our son, and he's so happy.
Thank you, Kathy. Gilbert, talk to us about your experience in coming out and just what that was for you.
It's hard because my coming out experience, I came out 2 different times. The first time I came out as queer, the second time I came out as non-binary. And they still kind of relate to each other, in my in the way that I came to understand that I was non-binary, very similar actually to Brad, where for a really long time I identified more so with girls. Like I think up until 3rd grade, I would always wish, when I would see a shooting star, I would always wish that I was a girl, but then would carefully, or not carefully, but would always kind of find that every time I would gravitate towards feminine or girl spaces, never actually find myself fitting in. Then I would try and go to the more masculine, more boys spaces, never found myself fitting in anywhere. And even for a really long time was really uncomfortable all the time with being called man, being called Mr., being called sir. And it wasn't until I got to university and found out that non-binary was a word that existed, that this is something that is in my own history as a Filipino person, and also just in the greater history of the world, really, because the idea that there's only men and women is really just strictly a Western European and US-based understanding of gender. In a variety of cultures around the world, gender is more than just 2 different things. And when I came to understand that, and when I came to really just dive into that more, that's how I came to understand, I'm not a man. There's a reason that I feel really uncomfortable always being called a man, but woman just never really fit for me either. And so non-binary came to be the thing that made the most sense for me. And then when I came out to my parents, I don't know actually if I ever came out to my mom. I think I did because I wrote my undergraduate thesis was on being non-binary, but I don't know if she really understood what was going on. But I came out to my dad. It was a stark difference compared to when I came out as queer. The first time I came out, they had found out I was self-harming. And then that led to me coming out to them for why I was doing that. And I think that might have really just shifted how they would have, or how they were going to react when I came out to them as non-binary. So I came out to my dad in a car when he was picking me up from college, and he was like, "What does that mean?" I'm like, "Well, it means I don't feel like a man or a woman." It's like, "Oh, so you're trans?" And I'm like, "Yeah, how do you know that word?" And he was like, "Oh, well, my workplace, someone's trans at work. We just had a workplace development thing about what pronouns are." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, this is not as awkward and weird as I thought it would be." It's like, okay, cool.
Perfect timing.
Right, perfect timing. You didn't know that your son is actually not your son, it's just your child. But the biggest struggle, actually, with coming out to them is I actually don't know if that really stuck with him. Because I told him that my pronouns are no longer he. I'm not your son, I'm your child. My pronouns are they. But the pronouns never seem to click with them. So every time I go home, I don't look like this, I don't wear makeup, I don't wear earrings, I don't paint my nails, I don't use they, them. My brother, he's more understanding and will do the things, but my parents, and I think it has to do with being the firstborn child of a first generation Filipino immigrant family, right? English isn't their first language. And in our language, in Tagalog, we don't have gender in our pronouns. So they misgender literally everyone and everything, right? So a remote is a he, a lantern is a she. My grandma, sometimes they actually accidentally say he, and I'm like, okay, well, them calling me he, maybe it's not actually them not understanding, but maybe it's because English is their second language, and in the language that they speak in their mind, they're saying "xia," which means they, right? Like maybe like I reframe it in my head when I hear them talk about me. It would be like, oh, they're actually saying this in their head because they don't think in English, right? And so it's been a really interesting kind of struggle of really
And I'm going to pick
understanding
up on
it,
that for our next question, which is really about getting into the mental health dynamic of this. What does this do to a young person that's trying to navigate this socially, their mental health? You know, is there discrimination? What happens there? Who would like to take that? Anne?
Okay, let me be honest here. This was difficult, and Gray went through bouts of depression and breakdown and periods of not really wanting to live because he couldn't figure out why he was so unhappy. And he wasn't one of those trans children that knew right away. He just didn't. It took a while, and he didn't have the obvious symptoms. And I was so clued into him because of all the other journey we had together. So it wasn't that I was in denial or was looking away. It just wasn't there. And there was a lot of gender dysphoria, a lot of getting up at 2 a.m. and not being able to sleep, sort of just wanting to jump out of his skin a little bit. And that went on for years, and we were so worried. And it was when he's had therapy for 13 or 14 years and medication, and all of it got better when he finally started transitioning. And I saw this limitless, joyful smile the first time he cut his hair, the first time we went to Macy's Men's. And I will say, and I'm really ashamed of this, but when we were in the Macy's Men's store for the first time and he was so happy, I saw a woman with whom I had grown up with her cute preppy son buying, an Easter, a blue blazer. And I was there with Gray buying men's clothes. And I was really, my heart was pounding. I must have had some fear and anxiety around. That was the only time that I ever caught my body reacting in a fearful or anxious way around the transition. And then after that first time, it was all okay. But anyway, after I think what was really reinforcing for me was seeing that beautiful smile when he hit those milestones. And the best day for him, I think, of his life was when he had his mastectomy. And he still comes downstairs just rubbing his front like he can't believe that they're gone. They might grow back, oh no. And he takes less medication now. He's happier and healthier and sees a future for himself. And he's been in a 3.5-year relationship with which was his lesbian girlfriend, but has accepted him as a trans man now. So a really positive work in progress, and a child who's evolved. He actually doesn't see a psychiatrist very often now. He has a life coach that helps more with executive functioning, but doing really well.
Thank you, Anne. Kathy?
I'd like to pick up on the Macy's experience, Anne, and how affirming it is to take your son or your daughter for clothes shopping and buy what they want to wear. It is so much fun. Men's Warehouse was great in trying to get the tux set for our son to go to high school prom. Bloomingdale's in New York was just delightful. I mean, it's such a joy to go in and you're experiencing, you go in and you think you're gonna hit roadblocks, and you find out that you don't, that people wanna help you and they wanna help your child. And it's just so joyful to have these experiences. Plus, it's sending the message to your child that you support who they wanna be. And that self-esteem, I think, is what really is important. Whatever age, they are courageous enough to tell you that they're transitioning. You should be, just so proud that they're telling you that they love you, then they're willing to trust you, and then go with it. It's a great ride.
Thank you, Kathy. Did anyone have a counter experience where it was really, you ran into some negativity or some discrimination? Gilbert?
Yeah, when I came out in college, I got misgendered by every single professor that I had in all of my small discussion spaces. And even in so many of the community spaces that I went to, like for Filipino community spaces in college, would get misgendered all the time, would be told that my pronouns were not grammatically correct, didn't make sense. Like, why are you even bringing this up into this space? It's a Filipino space, not a queer space, not a trans space. And I'm like, well, I'm all of those things, so how is this not a space for me, right? So like having come out and like being in those spaces, especially in university, like was very, very isolating, and even trying to get my friends to really understand what it was a really difficult experience. The college professors specifically were the hardest bit. I remember like it was a 10-person feminism or intro to feminist theory class, which is interesting. You would think that in a feminist theory class it wouldn't be like that. But the professor continually like misgendered me, and it got to a point where I had to scream and yell at them in the middle of a discussion because they kept misgendering me after everyone else in the room corrected them for me.
So it sounds like it can be very frustrating, and you definitely ran into discrimination. Brad.
Yeah, I mean, it was 15 years ago when I started to kind of come out to family and friends, and at a job, like this is 3 jobs ago, it was very much like I was in college admissions actually, so I was on the road a lot, and I'd be like, you know, wearing women's clothes, sometimes just like driving from Portland to Seattle or LA to Phoenix just to kind of, what is that like? And then fearing people were like looking in the car like, who is that man wearing women? But, you know, there was none of that. And then I switched jobs, and I was working at a local high school here, and very slowly starting to come out, like growing my hair, wearing some women's clothes, and then I was told to get my hair cut by my employer. And I was like new at the school, and I thought this does not bode well. You know, I don't really have a lot of options here. It was one of those things like I kind of had to do it to keep the job. And so I did, started growing it again, and before it got to the length that it was the prior time, I was told to get my hair cut a second time. And that was the, like, I can't really do anything about this. I don't know the law, and there's nothing I can really do. I should just go along with this and see how it goes. Eventually, the head of school left, and new head of school came in. Finally, I was like, okay, grow hair again, start wearing women's clothes. But at work, I was still identifying as male, even though the hair was growing longer. And then there was a succession of a lot of trans teen suicides about 4 years ago, and that was finally my, like, I have to do something about this. And I went to an off-campus event representing my school, wearing a skirt, and did the same thing about 2 weeks later. And then a couple weeks after that, I got called in to a meeting with the head of school, the high school director, and my boss, and they said, we got a report that you were wearing a skirt off campus, what's up? And, you know, you can't do that. Like, if a woman can wear a skirt, why can't a man? And all this. And, you know, it was one of those things that, again, here we go. This is California. This is the Bay Area. This is San Mateo County. How can this possibly be happening? What is going on here? And then told to make a plan for wearing a skirt, like how to tell the parents in the community about this. And, like, I shouldn't have, you know, and it was just like a succession of major stumbles. Finally, and this is a school that had a mission statement about diversity and, you know, promoting everything that was good in the world. And then finally we had a faculty meeting at the beginning of the next year about how awesome diversity was. I stood up in the entire faculty and I was like, I'm transgender, this is awesome, amazing. And I got like high fives, like everybody, standing ovation, applause, and then got called into another meeting by the head of school, et cetera. And like, they didn't include the counselor that I wanted to be there, the dean of students that I wanted to be there, the diversity director I didn't want to. It was like this, just what is going on? And again, told to make a plan. I said I'm going to write a blog. I was given wording by the school that was not true. It was like, they're so supportive. I'm like, no, you're not. It was, anyway, long story short, you know, that didn't work out. I'm like, this cannot be a place for me. I was hired by another school, Alto International School, awesome, very accepting new IB school in the Bay Area. And then I was hired by MA back in June or July or something. And it's been absolutely incredible, like to be yourself, actually, and be accepted and be a role model for kids. And, you know, I can't even describe like how, you know, after 48, 49 years of not being myself, now the last 2, I can be, and what that's like to be at school. It's been amazing. So.
Laura, you had a comment?
Yeah, I want to build on what Brad was saying because I won't talk about my son's mental health experience. It's actually pretty similar to what's been said. It was, he was in a crisis. I think that he tells me today that he didn't know either. So it wasn't like he didn't feel comfortable coming out, we just didn't know what was going on. But the thing I want to build on with Brad is that one of the things that Eli, that's my trans son, and I talk about when we do some workshops with schools and camps he's also worked with, because he's a camper. And if you've ever been to summer camp, it's like the girls' cabins are that way and the boys' cabins are that way. And his summer camp now has had several kids and counselors move. Like one summer they were in girls' camp and next summer they're in boys' camp, or the vice versa, and it's been great. But with the work that we've done, one of the things that we've really emphasized is that gender inclusivity benefits everyone. So it's not that you should have these good policies to make like Brad's life better. And it's, just the decent human thing as well as the legal thing to do, but that it actually makes your whole community better. It makes things better for cis people. It makes things better for all different people with all different kinds of difference. And being able to say that you have a trans inclusive policies, I think it's really important to think about that it's actually benefits the whole community, not just like the person who has to pee and can't find a bathroom that's comfortable or whatever.
Thank you for that, Laura. And I wanted to segue into a question that it is really one that I know myself as a lay person, I'm going to put it that way, that's trying to learn about this. I don't even know how to ask this question sometimes. And so I'm so excited that we have panelists that are willing to talk about this. Surgery and hormones, becoming who you really are and going through that process. What do we need to know?
You don't need to do it in order to be who you really are. That would be the start. And then somebody else can take it from there.
Right. Yeah, thank you, Laura. You want to talk about that, Ann? Go ahead.
Sure. In our case, or in Gray's case,
Mommy.
I know, right? I'm sorry. Gray took started on hormones for about 3 years, and I think you did the opposite. Eli did the opposite.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
No,
Anyway,
so I'll say what you like.
Yeah, okay.
You go
Yeah.
first.
So 3 years of hormones, and then was ready to do the mastectomy. And I think had really wanted to do it sooner than that. But the hormones, we got a little bit of a second puberty. And I said, I am going to send you to boarding school again if you go through a whole full attitudinal puberty on me. So we didn't have much of that. We had more acne and that sort of thing. And then, but he did get stronger, and he was really happy with the results. His voice lowered, which is, as many of you know, is the one irreversible side effect of hormones. And then the mastectomy was just kind of the pinnacle, the best day of his life. His girlfriend flew in and was with him, as were his dad and I. And I think to this day, for him, that was a big part of his social transition, because after that he passed. And before, he felt very scrutinized walking around town or going into a bar. And after that, he could dress like, he looks like a little kind of semi-preppy conservative guy now. And I think just not feeling everyone's eyes on him as much, and maybe you can speak to that a little bit, was such a relief, such a relief. And so it's not for everybody, but for him, it was everything.
Thank you, Ann. Yeah, Brad, will you tell us a bit about your experience and just kind of where you're at now and what you like when people ask you, so that you can educate us?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm old. I mean, compared with the kids I'm working with at the high school, and so many that I'm still in touch with from almost 20 years ago. I've thought, like, when I read that book, does this mean I'm going to have surgery, and does this mean I'm going to have hormones? And for me, that still is a question mark. Sure, I'm over 50 now, but I don't know. Honestly, that's something I struggle with, because I think sometimes get more questions and stares from people, because I still look male in so many ways. My voice is deep. I have 5 o'clock or whatever it is, 7:15 o'clock shadow. But, you know, I wear female clothing and I get a lot of kind of double takes. And every once in a while I'm like in a grocery checkout line and somebody says, "Excuse me, ma'am," and I turn around, you know, because I now turn around to that. And I confuse people. I've had men hit on me because they think I'm a woman. And then I turn around and they're like, "Oh, you're not," you know, it's just a very interesting experience that people write books about. And I think maybe I'd be happier, even happier than I am now if I had surgery or hormones. But at this stage of my life, I'm like, do I need that? I feel like I'm so old and I'm not, you know, 13 or whatever anymore. Do I need that? You know, for me, part of it's just like, why can't I have long hair, wear skirts, wear dresses? Why should that be a big deal? Scottish men wear skirts, right? There are a lot of people with long hair. I don't know. So it still is a question for me. I don't know. Do I want to go through all that and missed work and insurance? And yeah, big question mark.
Process.
I have
Kathy.
a hormone anecdote.
Yes, please.
I was scared to death when I heard that my then daughter was going to take testosterone after I had just experienced a horrible death of my mother from cancer. And I was very concerned that by taking hormones that my son was going to introduce the possibility that he might get cancer. Now, I don't know whether that was a rational or irrational emotion, but that was what was going through my mind. And his comment to me made all the difference in the world. He said, "I would rather live 5 fewer years as who I want to be than to have to suffer a whole life of who I don't want to be. And the hormones will help me enjoy my life." And at that moment, it's like, okay, duh, I shut up and go away. He was absolutely right. That was the hormone anecdote for me.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that,
And
Kathy.
again, he was leading us along the way, as we came to understand later, and he invited us at every step of the way. We had having an open relationship and being supportive of the child all the way through is pretty key. Depending where you are, you may want to know more about how important that is to them. We found out later how important it was to him. And then when he did go through the mastectomy, we were there for him as well. And we were invited to participate the whole way along. So I would hope that everyone could have such an experience as he did in becoming more himself.
Sure. I mean, for me, like, surgery and hormones isn't really part of my own journey. Like, I think just speaking to, like, same thing that Brad was saying, like, for some people it is part of the journey. Sometimes medical transition, hormones, surgery, body modification, right? That is part of their journey. For a lot of other people, like, your gender identity just looks different. Some women don't, like, some trans women don't opt to have bottom surgery. Some trans men don't opt to have mastectomies or like chest or top surgery, right? Non-binary people, like, what does even a non-binary body even look like? And even trying to fathom for myself, like, what does that mean? Like, brings up a lot of weird questions, and the financial burden that comes with that is just like, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
So,
We're going to go ahead and segue into the Q&A for
Vanya,
the audience.
May I just add one thing here
Sure.
about the, similar to what you said? So I said in the beginning, like, you don't have to take hormones to transition. But I did want to say that my child did opt to take testosterone and opted for top surgery. And he would not want anyone to call what he did a mastectomy, just by the way. You know, everybody has their own thing, but
The insurance company said it was, right? Yeah.
I don't know if that's true, but he did it actually, yeah, okay, maybe. But he wouldn't ever talk about it that way, and that's actually my point, is he didn't like it when I called his chest his breasts. And, you know, he had significant breasts, you know, but he said, "This is Mom, don't use the terms that bring up the dysphoria." And so he wanted it to be called his chest. Like, whatever, just basically think of, like, whatever you would call, like, I have a cisgender daughter and a cisgender son, and then my trans son in the middle. And so it's pretty easy to know, like, what would I say for Abby or what would I say for Toby? And then as far as surgery goes, he did opt to have the top surgery. And a lot of people have asked me, is he ever going to fully transition? And I'm like, so what do you mean by that? And what they mean is, is he going to have bottom surgery? And in this forum, he's, given me permission to discuss this. He's not interested right now. He may be at another point in his life. And he tells me that the best line, if I'm not in a safe space like this, and it's just someone like in the grocery store asking me, he says, you can tell him, Mom, it's a funny thing. My college-age son doesn't like me to talk about his genitals with people he doesn't know.
Well, I have to say that not only is that humorous, but super fantastic in standing here trying to understand, what is the trans experience? I learned so much just in, hey, this isn't about surgery. This is about who you are. So thank you. And we are going to open it up to audience Q&A. Yes.
Hi, so we are parents of a 17, almost 18-year-old trans daughter. And I'm hoping to hear about how you deal with mental health issues that come up into transition. Because she came out when she was 15 and a half, 16. The first 6 months were pretty hard, big adjustment for everybody. And then we were on board and we got hormones and the name changed legally. That was all terrific, presenting, the way she wants to be. And for some reason now, the depression and the anxiety has gotten huge again, and we don't know how to help her. We're trying to find the right support for her.
I see, Laura, you're nodding your head, and you've got the microphone. Why don't you go ahead and
I'll just be brief. We had a lot of that too, and one of the things that really helped, we just connected, was the Gilbert support group, and Gray was in the 18 to 25 versus yours would be the 10 to 18, I think. That and medication and therapy, which is so. Oh yeah, Gilbert.
Gilbert, talk a little bit about your support group and who you hope to bring in. Give us a snippet on that.
Yeah, I guess. So the support groups that we run are not therapeutic groups. They're more so just a space for queer and trans youth just to be in a space that is only queer and trans people, because as young people, do we have those spaces? No, those spaces don't often exist.
Can you tell them what the kids mean in the wide variety of it by queer?
Yeah. So when I say queer, it really is just meaning not straight. That's really all it means right now. Yeah. And it's kind of just a way for folks to identify themselves without really having to tell you exactly who you are within like the entire umbrella of the thing. For some of us, it's the only word that really fits, right? But going back to the support groups, they're just really spaces for youth to come together, meet other queer and trans kids. Sometimes it's just only trans kids, compare experiences, talk about different things, and sometimes really we just sit around, play board games, and just create that warm and welcoming space for folks to know that there's a space that they can come to that's not home, that's not school, that they can really just see other people, make connections, and feel connected, right? So the spaces that we hold are really just about helping folks feel some level of safety and connection and knowing that there is a supportive space for them, because oftentimes at school, oftentimes at home, it doesn't feel like they have people, right, that truly and fully understand what they're going through.
Thank you so much, Gilbert. Anne.
Well, I was just going to say, I'm wondering if some of the fear is A, fear of the future, and B, fear of feeling other still. And to the extent, now Gray's up in Seattle, which has a much more vibrant versus the suburbs. And as he meets more trans people, he feels more mainstream. So I don't know what the resources here would be to the extent that you could partner her with other trans teens.
And Laura, why don't you go ahead and comment on that?
Is your daughter in high school? So college is way better. I mean, first of all, like every class, right? Like the right college. Yeah, and I mean, it's you can get a good counselor and you can talk to kids, but when you walk on campus, that was my biggest fear. Is when we did a college tour, I was like, oh my God, who are you going to live with, and where are you going to shower, and all of that. And so you really want to ask those questions and maybe even put in a little extra time, not do the typical Palo Alto, like it's Yale on Tuesday morning and Wesleyan on Tuesday afternoon and so forth. And so, and I think that a lot of our kids or our friends, it's, correct me if you guys disagree, but I think that they become experts at, if they can, at self-care, and it takes more time than the average cis person. So we all need to take care of ourselves, but the emotional energy of just living as a queer or trans person it's just more. And so having a therapist, having some classes that you do for exercise, having some meditation practice or prayer life or whatever it is for your spiritual development, and realizing that it might take your kid even longer to get through school, even if they're super smart, because they just are going to have more times when they might need a little extra love.
Thank you for that. And I'm just going to add in, actually, personally, that a lot of the young trans kids who are coming to me are ones who are no longer safe in the community. And I'd like to really compliment that there are some programs out there that are really making a difference. And I'm happy to connect you with this as well.
Can I just add really quickly, as a college counselor, like this is kind of what I've been doing for about 20 years, and it is really important, to find the right colleges that can be part of it. It's stressful enough living around here, going through the college process for anybody, and it's just important to find those good fits. There is a great resource, campuspride.org, I think it is, and it will tell you which colleges are genuinely accepting and which just it's kind of a superficial thing. But finding that college is like 100 times better than high school, and they find a community.
Anyone else want to add into this question before we move on? Okay. Question over here, and then second one.
Yeah, I'm wondering what middle schools and high schools are more accepting, and how you deal with, all that extra energy that it takes when your kid is just 10.
Who'd like to take that one?
Well, I'm a middle school teacher. I haven't been authorized to represent Castellea, but my boss is in the room. Well, one of them. I think that most middle school educators are very conflicted still, because many people still don't understand that gender is different than sexuality. And so they're really grappling with, we can't tell sixth graders that because, we're not going to give them the full-on sex ed yet. And honestly, gender is like the 4-year-olds will tell you, like in your movie. And so our kids didn't actually come out, or some of you didn't come out until you were adults, but it's a really common time for people to come out is when they're in preschool or kindergarten. And so clearly they haven't decided on who's going to be their sexual partner yet, but they do have an experience of gender. And so really, even though they're intricately connected, really separating them, I think, is super important. So the middle school community, I think in general, Palo Alto is, I'm very sorry for many reasons to hear about your experience, Brad, in the workplace. However, I do think it's a relatively supportive place and getting better, and people are seeking to learn. And so I think, I don't know of any schools that aren't at least interested in the conversation.
Well, let me ask it this way, because I really love this question, being a consultant on schools, and I don't do middle school, but a lot of times I'm telling parents, look, these are like the two elements you want to look for so that you can know what you're looking for when you go into a school. Would the panelists comment on what might be the two top things if you were bringing your child to a middle school today that you would really want to see to know this child would be safe emotionally? I'm going to pick on Rich.
Really no experience. Our daughter at the time was accepted in the school. I don't recall any stories of her having difficulty in the bathrooms or with any particular teachers, or with her classmates. And she found great friends. I will say,
Did she say she was trans in middle school?
no, of course, no. But she was a tomboy, and that was kind of cool. Yeah, so she was invited to play on the baseball team in middle school, which was great. It was her choice to do it or not do it.
So it sounds like schools that have different opportunities for who you are.
But and again, it depends. We know people that have kids that are coming identify. I'm not going to use the wrong word, but they're moving forward in these younger years, right? Age 4 or 5.
Yep.
So we really can't speak to that. Gilbert?
Thank you. Yeah, Gilbert. And Gilbert, do you have middle school kids in your school? And what are they talking about? What are they feeling in their schools?
So middle school is a really tough time for everybody. Middle school is the age where everyone is going through puberty, everyone hates their body, everyone hates each other, that's right. No, I talk with middle schoolers all the time. Even my cisgender queer students and my trans students, they all say like, yeah, I've been told to kill myself for being trans in my middle school by another middle schooler, right? So these things, like, we might say that places feel more accepting, but the student-to-student interactions really still have so much of a longer place to go, right?
So if you and I were at school together, I'm taking you to a middle school on one of my tours and saying, hey, Gilbert, I really want you to suss out whether this is a safe place for my trans child to be. What would you be looking for?
Well, I'm going to speak to two things, so I'll address this first and then do something else. But the first thing that I would look for is, like, is there actually representation of LGBTQ things on their campus? Do they have images? Do they have safe space stickers? If you talk to the administration, are they even aware of, like, what trans is? Do they know what pronouns are? Have they ever had experience with having trans student populations on their campus, right? So those are some really key questions to ask when you go visit these schools. Another thing that I wanted to say that our clinicians and therapists at the Pride Center often talk about with parents is it doesn't necessarily matter what school you go to, your child is going to have a tougher time, right? Because we do live in a society where it is harder. And the important thing to know, or the important thing for you to know as a parent is that you need to still be on the side of your child, right? The one thing that you care about as a parent is your child's safety. The one thing that your child cares about is being able to be who they are. So you can meet in the middle by saying, okay, you are going to be out at school if that is your choice. How can we make sure that you are going to feel safe and create plans for all of the different situations, right? If you are, like, if you're going to be in PE, how can we make sure that you feel safe in PE? How do we want to address if, like, a student says something to you? How do we want to go about that? Do you want us to come to the school and talk to the teachers? How do we want to, like, plan for those different kinds of crisis level kind of situations, right? And really sitting down and talking with your children and telling them, like, I am here with you as an ally. I am here with you, or here with you with all of the love and support and strength that I can muster. And I want to make sure that you feel safe. How can we do that for these situations? How can we make sure that
So Gilbert,
you
I
feel
hear
safe?
two things. I hear make a plan with your child. Let them know they're there for you. And the second thing I really hear is go in and really get a sense of who are these people running the school? Do they have an understanding? Is this a safe space? Thank you.
Could I add just one?
Sure.
I think to build on that, I would say I would look into staff training, and I would look at the school's bullying policy. And I would avail myself of the necessary legal background in case you have to go to bat a little bit.
Thank you. Excellent question. Sir, you had a question, correct?
Yeah, he has.
Talk to parents, whether they are cisgender parents or trans kid parents. Talk to parents in the school to find out what is happening, because a school can have a fantastic no bullying policy. That doesn't mean that bullying isn't happening. The people who will tell you are the parents who have kids at that school. So talk to parents.
And
That's an excellent point. I want to add on that. When a lot of what I do is give recommendations for schools and programs that are therapeutic, which are not in this area, but one of the most important things that I have parents do is get parent recommendations and ask sort of the pros and cons. So that's a great way to go in knowing.
the other thing that I recommend is there's a wonderful organization in the East Bay called Gender Spectrum. And you can go on their website, and they have a 5-page PDF called Making a School Plan. And you can take that into your child's school, and it's a checklist, and it's very comprehensive. And some of it you might say, oh, my kid doesn't need that, or whatever. But they've tried to think through everything that your child could need, whether they're non-binary, whether they're a trans girl, trans boy, whatever. And It's really great. And if your school says, oh, that 5 pages, that's kind of long, we don't really do that. Well, there's your, I mean, if they won't do that form with you, I wouldn't deal with them.
Thank you, Laura. We're going to move on to another question. Sir, you had a question.
Gilbert, thanks for your wisdom and your guidance. On balance, do you think that social media is a good thing or a bad thing in this space?
Excellent question. Over to you, Gilbert. What do you think?
Social
Easy
media.
question.
It depends on how how your child is using social media. It can be a really great space to find people, to find and build your social network. I know for me as a young queer and gender nonconforming child, I went to school in a space where the GSA, if someone found out that you were going anywhere near that room, you would be bullied and beat up by the locker, right? And so going to online spaces, for me, it was a really helpful thing. The issue is when it becomes super a kind of a codependent kind of space where you're only having those interactions online, or where the child is having those online conversations in secret, right? So I think they can be really good spaces until it becomes this really obsessive space, and that's the point at which it would be good to really just talk with your child about how they're using social media. Who are you following? Who are you talking to? In a way that's not super invasive, but more so just, I want to make sure that you feel safe there. And I know that this is where you feel safe finding support, and I want to make sure that this isn't some weird 20-year-old talking to you about whatever a 20-year-old is going to be talking to a 12-year-old about.
And Brad, I know you're working with a lot of teenagers. Can you also comment on that?
I think they tend to find, it's it's good and it's bad. There's no clear definition for the kids. They find community. I know if I had had a community back when I was in high school, if I even knew what it was back then, it would have helped a lot. And at the same time, they tell us these horrific stories, and as an administrator, sometimes we're the first people they come to with screenshots of what people have said to them. And it's just, you can unfortunately see why many are, thinking about self-harm.
Yeah. What are you hearing and seeing when they're coming in with that? Walk us into that world.
Literally go kill yourself.
Wow.
I mean, that's, and kids apparently have no problem whatsoever putting this in writing and pressing send. And, the nicknames are still around from 40 years ago, hey tranny. So there are still things that cycle around, and it just, to me, that takes me back to what I've experienced. But at the same time, the positives, when I finally came out publicly, which it hasn't even been 2 years now, huge Facebook posts, very lengthy, this, this is the best day of my life. And I got something like 600 likes and about 190 positive comments from people, emails, people stopping by. Social media was awesome for me, but I was almost 50. I was not a teenager. So teens will say it is the best of things, it is the worst of things, and I don't know what the
So we're
good
having
answer
very
is.
fragile young people putting themselves out online and getting attacked and getting support. So really mixed bag.
Can I push back?
Yes.
This is good to have point counterpoint.
Yeah, please.
I feel like social media maybe saved Gray's life. So many of the forums, people, he lives in the suburbs. There was nobody like him except with Gilbert's group. And that wasn't even a trans group, actually. It was the queer group. So I feel like, and Gray left me almost everything that Gray said was most supportive. I have this list. We're all either Facebook or internet forums, all the research for his surgery, Mayo Clinic, all of that. And that's not to say there isn't a dark side, but there is so much out there that can help your child. And even to the point, there's this artist, Skylar. We ended up buying oil paintings from Skylar and listening to his music, and it kind of became a family thing that Gray brought to us. So I know there's the dark side. We just had a lot of good.
Absolutely. Thank you for
Yeah,
that.
and I
hold
was
on just a
scared
second.
to death of the dark side.
And can you just talk a little bit more of what you would do now to potentially protect a child going through that? It sounds like it was really positive for your child, but with the knowledge that you have, what would you say to parents of how do you protect them?
Well, Gray was older, but I think I would probably get, is it Internet Nanny? And just take control for a younger child, because then you can monitor all their usage and decide to turn it off. And a lot for the trans with the gender dysphoria, they're up at 2 o'clock at night and they're so troubled. And, a lot of nights Gray would wake me up and just jump in bed with us and sleep in the middle and we would just soothe him. But I think those late night sessions are probably the ones where it could potentially go negative and go into cutting and self-harm and the some of the darker parts of it. So I think is it Internet Nanny?
There are a lot of sites
Yeah.
that you can monitor your kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe a bit of that for the younger ones.
Wonderful. I know, Laura, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Eli came out as gay first, so I thought, oh, I have a lesbian daughter, and like being who I am and being where we live, and like, great, okay, cool. And people actually said to me, oh, well, your child, they said she back then, but your child is suffering because she's gay. And I was like, I'm not convinced. And then they said, she's suffering because you and her father were divorced. And I said, I know that can be hard on kids, but actually in our situation, I don't think that's it either. And so we couldn't really figure out what it was. But during that time period, I know that he was going on a lot of sites for trans men and learning about trans and learning about, oh gosh, everything, like top surgery and binders. Oh yeah, we haven't talked about binders. I was scared to death of binders.
They're torture devices.
Right? But if you wear a 38D, you want to look like a man, you need a binder. A binder, if you don't know, is basically like a flattening sort of super sports bra. That when, like if I put one on, I don't think I would look like a man, but it would be like flatter. And so my child wore binders and bought them actually online with money he made before he came out to me. And so I finally realized when I was getting these things in the mail that I didn't know what they were. So anyway, they're much healthier than the alternatives, which can be like duct tape and bandages and other things that can be actually quite dangerous, especially if your kid is a pretty intense athlete. Like binding your chest and then trying to work out at big time is not so good. So binders actually, in the meantime, like if you're considering top surgery in the future, because I was scared to death of top surgery too, I think binders were actually pretty great. And one of the things we did was we could afford, I mean, my son did it at first, but then I bought them too. We could afford binders, and so we had like 8 of them, and they're like more expensive than sports bras. And so we gave them to people. And there's a huge community of kids that trade binders because their parents won't talk about it. So talk about binders.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful.
Quick question for Gilbert. My daughter is just at the very beginning of all this. She came out as lesbian at 15 and was, I thought, ecstatically happy. And so it was all awesome. And then now she's, not getting out of bed. She's quit. She's kind of dropping out of school at 17 and put on her first binder today. And it's like, oh my God, what the hell's going on? So she's going to be hopefully going over to the center. Is there something for parents?
Email me?
What?
Did you email me?
Did I? I didn't. No. Maybe she did.
Email me a lot about the group, so I'm just like, what?
Yeah. So she's been looking at that. I'm wondering if the center also has things for parents, because I'm just beside myself at this point, not knowing what's going on.
Yeah. So we used to actually annually we run a parent support group, specifically through the center with our clinicians as a kind of a psycho-ed educational space for parents to learn more about LGBTQ things in general. But I think the 3rd Monday of the month we actually have a PFLAG meeting from 6 to 9 p.m. If you talk with me afterward, I can get your email so I can confirm that. For folks who are not familiar what PFLAG is, I think it stands for Parents and Family Members of Lesbians and Gays, but that's an old name, but now it also includes parents and family members of like transgender folks. And it's a space for parents really to just come together and like talk about like what is this experience like for you and get that kind of support. Because while we all like want to have like support for our kids, the parents as well need a lot of support because you're also going through a transition yourself, right? You're letting go of like the expectations that you had of your child, and you need support in finding ways to like let go and accept the child that you have and accept the child that they're becoming, right? So we have a PFLAG group at the Pride Center.
Thank you so much for that. Well, we're going to go ahead and wrap up for tonight. And what I want to do is one last question to our wonderful panelists. And thank you guys so much for your honesty, your ability to show up like this and be here for people like me who are really grappling to learn what is this experience. What's one thing you want the audience tonight and myself to take away from this conversation? One bullet point that you hope kind of gets tattooed onto their heart. Let's start with you, Brad.
It works out. Just to give hope. I mean, where I am in my life and having grown up I was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, very conservative family that voted for the current president and so forth, and still they all supported me. It has been absolutely amazing. All the fears I had about losing friends and family, none of that happened. Yes, I had difficulty at a former employer, have since been hired by 2 different high schools. It's going to be okay, especially with the kids we have today. They are so accepting and with it and on it. It's just like absolutely amazing, which is why I love working at schools. I'm surrounded by it all day. So
Thank you. Anne.
I agree with everything he just said, and we didn't talk about this, but any grief that I felt, this is my take home, is superficial. There are no more dresses, there's no more prom. My beautiful boy, his heart, his soul, his fantastic mind are the same as they were before, and that hasn't changed. So that's my...
Awesome. Thank you, Anne.
There's so many things. That was beautiful. I think one of the things that is good to keep in mind, especially when, like you mentioned, you're in the throes of it, and this is like so raw and center for you, is that these kids and you have many identities. And this is just one of them. And so I guess the message to me would be sort of like being aware of your own and their intersectionality. And if that's not a term that you had the staff training on yet, it's it just means that you might identify as a particular ethnic group, or you might identify as having a particular sexual identity, or being from a particular part of the country. And so whatever it is that your identities are, your gender is one of them. And so we all indeed have gender, and your kid has a gender that's not as mainstream as mine, but that they're really, all the different parts of them are super important too. And so when they walk in the room, they're not just like the trans girl. There are a lot of other things that matter as much or more to them, and that just keep loving all of those things too.
Laura, say that word once more, because I'm going to need a refresher.
Oh, intersectionality.
Intersectionality.
It just means, for example, that I'm not just a woman, I'm a white woman. And I'm not just a white woman, I'm a white cis woman. And I'm not just a white cis woman, I'm a white cis heterosexual woman. Okay, and I'm an oldest daughter.
So it's all your descriptors coming together.
Yes, and the time when you hear it the most is like women of color or queer women of color. They're always, it's like, oh, we need some representation. Oh, Lauren could serve all those roles, you know? So these people are keenly aware of it. White people tend not to be quite as aware of it. But you guys all have intersectionality too.
Thank you. Rich.
Thanks. I'll probably be preaching to the choir because you probably wouldn't be here tonight if you didn't unconditionally love your child. And I can't say it enough, but when times get tough, remember that you do unconditionally love your child, and they need that so much. Further than that, everyone you meet needs to unconditionally love their children or the children that might come into such a situation, and we're a community. Gilbert knows this, Brad, you know this. We're all in this room together tonight, but take away tonight that you want to be part of a bigger community, you want to pass the word and keep that unconditional love going wherever and whoever you talk to, okay?
Awesome.
And I'll pick up on that with another anecdote, because that's what I do. Be proud of your child. Be so supportive. Admire the courage that they're telling you, the love that they're telling you. And the anecdote that I'm going to tell you about is related to PFLAG. One of the best experiences of my life was marching down Market Street in San Francisco in the Gay Pride Parade with PFLAG, with my son, and we were at the head holding the banner, and I was wondering, are people going to think we're odd? I heard from the crowd over and over and over, I wish you were my mom. I wish you were my mom. That tells you these are people whose parents did not support them, who did not show pride in them. And if you ever have the chance to do that march, go for it, because it's a community that's just incredible. And it's overwhelming how emotional it is to see the differences of people that are there and so supportive of the gay and trans community. So self-esteem for the child, and support from the parent, and support from the community, and be proud of it.
I love that story. Gilbert, your closing thought.
I never like being the closer. I feel like I'm just going to be echoing everything that everyone else has said. The one thing that has just been coming into my mind the entire time, up until now, just waiting for my turn, has just been that the whole thing, in order to be raising your child, in order to just continue having a relationship with your child, right, is to ground yourself in the fact that you love your child. And that love isn't just saying I love you, that love is doing the work, right? That love is hard, and that supporting your child can be hard, and it can be difficult. It can create so many conflicts between you and your child, but at the end of the day, if you love your child and you want to continue having a relationship with your child, it takes work, right? It takes work. And if you love your child enough, right, then you can continue having that relationship. So just always to remember that you need to act and build your relationship with love, and make sure that love is how you approach every decision from now on.
Beautiful, and what a great way to end. Let's give the panelists a hand here. They have been amazing tonight.